I cheated once, got pregnant, and now my husband wants a divorce and for me to disappear forever. I, Diana, want to share my story as a cautionary tale so that others can learn from my mistake. At the time of this incident I was 25 years old and my husband Paul was 28. We had been in a relationship for almost 3 years and had been married for 1 year. My husband is a hard-working man, a great provider and a wonderful loving spouse, everything I had ever dreamed of. About a year into our marriage, my husband had a construction project that required him to be out of town for 3 weeks, including 2 weekends. On the first weekend my husband was gone. 2 of my single girlfriends invited me to join them at a local club. At first I declined their invitation, but they insisted that I be the designated driver as they were planning to have a few drinks. I finally relented, but I did not inform my husband or my mother, an older married sister, because they would have strongly disapproved of my decision. We arrived at the club around 10 p.m., we had a drink, and my girlfriends and I had a nice time. 30 p.m. The place was already bustling with people dancing and enjoying drinks. My friends quickly immersed themselves in the fun, while I stayed on the sidelines at a round, high-top table, simply observing their dancing and the other patrons. During one of the breaks in the dancing, my friends brought their dancing partners back to our table to rest and chat. During one of the breaks in the dancing, my friends brought their dance partners back to our table to rest and chat. During this time, another man, who we'll call Joe, joined us for conversation. Joe was a friend of one of the guys at our table. When my friends and their dance partners returned to the dance floor, Joe stayed at the table with me and we started talking. As the night wore on, my friends became quite intoxicated and created scenes at the table. Joe had to help me get them to my car and generously offered to drive with me to drop them off at their homes. Since he had come to the club with his friend, I agreed to drop him off at his home after we had dropped off my friends. I was hesitant at first because I was happily married, but he insisted and said, "Come on, just for another 15 minutes." I reluctantly agreed, knowing it was wrong and foreseeing what might happen. Once we were upstairs we grabbed some sparkling water and sat on his couch and started talking. After only a few minutes of talking, Joe kissed me softly on the lips and things escalated quickly to the point where we became intimate just 5 minutes later. I immediately realized the gravity of my actions and told Joe that I could never see or speak to him again because I was happily married and feeling overwhelmed. Guiltily, he expressed his understanding and regret, and admitted that he had also made a mistake by getting involved with another man's wife. We did not exchange contact information, phone numbers, or last names. We both lived in Los Angeles, about 20 miles apart, so the chances of our paths crossing again were slim. Several days passed and my period was overdue. It didn't arrive for a week, then 2. When my husband returned home, we quickly resumed our loving relationship, but I carried this dark secret inside me. In desperation, I went to the drugstore to buy a home pregnancy test and my worst fears were confirmed. I was pregnant with Joe's child. Overwhelmed and disgusted with myself, I needed to confide in someone, so I arranged a meeting with my mother and sister to share my situation and seek their advice. They both had deep fondness for my husband and could not understand why I would engage in such behavior. Our entire family was devout Catholics and we were all committed to our faith. I understood that from this point on I would be an outcast in my own family, despite our Catholic faith. I confessed to them that I intended to have an abortion because I could not risk losing my husband. My plan was to have an abortion the next time my husband was out of town. My mother and sister vehemently objected to my decision, insisting that I must be honest with my husband and that if I did not tell him within the next 24 hours, they would meet with him and reveal the truth. I knew deep down that they were right and I asked them to be present when I spoke to my husband because I needed their support. They agreed and the next day we all gathered in our apartment eagerly awaiting my husband's return from work. When he walked through the door, he greeted us warmly, called us his 3 favorite ladies, and gave us hugs and kisses. It brought tears to my eyes. He noticed my tears and the solemn expressions on our faces and immediately asked what was wrong. What happened? Is everything all right? I informed him that I had something important to discuss and that he should sit down. Surprisingly, he did not react with anger. Instead he let go of my hands, stood up and walked over to the stools at our kitchen counter. My mother and sister were in tears as I begged for his forgiveness, saying I expected him to yell, use hurtful words, and demand details about the affair, but instead he remained completely silent, which made me feel even worse. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, tears streaming down his cheeks. My mother and sister stood up to hug him and they were all crying. I felt teary and completely disgusted with myself. After taking a moment to collect himself, he went to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, dried it with a towel and returned to the living room. As he entered the room again, I continued to try to open up, But he remained silent. He packed a suitcase and left. I asked where he was going and he replied that he would get back to me the following week. I bombarded Ed's phone with voicemails and texts repeatedly expressing my grief and my desire for him to be a father to my child. Unfortunately, he never responded. Instead, a week later I received a call from his attorney informing me that he had been arrested and that he was going to jail for the rest of his life. A week later, I received a phone call from his attorney informing me that my husband was filing for divorce. I was utterly devastated and sought comfort from my mother and sister. My mother and sister consoled me and assured me that they would support me through this difficult situation and during my pregnancy. However, they made it abundantly clear that they were not pleased with me and were completely on my husband's side. They even mentioned their willingness to testify on his behalf during the trial if I chose to contest the divorce. Unfortunately, he never responded. Instead, he sent me a message through his attorney expressing his best wishes for me and our baby, but asserting his need to move on with his life without me. I was completely devastated and fell into a deep depression. About 2 months later, we all gathered in the courthouse for the hearing, and as soon as I saw my husband for the first time since he left, I couldn't hold back my tears and tried to run toward him. I couldn't control my tears and I tried to run toward him, but my mother and sister stopped me and offered me comfort since I wasn't contesting the divorce and we had few assets to divide. The hearing was brief as we left the courtroom. I wanted to approach my husband again, but his lawyer led him through a side exit into a conference room to keep us apart. Fast forward 2 years and I'm living with my parents and raising a beautiful baby girl. My mother, sister, and father have been incredibly supportive and I couldn't have gotten through this difficult experience without them. Recently, I started a part-time job as a clerk. Part-time job as a clerk at the local library, with plans to transition to full-time once my child is old enough to attend school. My ex-husband has moved on with his life and found a new girlfriend, and he seems very content. She is young, beautiful, and comes from a great family. I am truly happy for him, but at the same time, I carry a deep sadness within me. Despite the joy my daughter brings me and the love I have for my family, there has been a significant void in my heart due to the loss of my wonderful husband after the divorce. I reached out to Joe and informed him of my pregnancy. We underwent non-invasive prenatal testing, which confirmed that I was pregnant. We underwent non-invasive prenatal testing that confirmed him as the father. He agreed to pay child support, and has consistently fulfilled his obligations. However, I harbor no romantic feelings for him and, in fact, harbor resentment for the disruption he has caused in my once beautiful life. As I turned the corner of one of the aisles pushing my daughter in the shopping cart, I suddenly found myself face to face with him. It caught me completely off guard and I felt like I couldn't breathe. He greeted me with a simple hello. At that moment my daughter flashed a smile and reached out her little hand to him while mumbling a few words and showing him her toy. He kindly said, "Hello there, beautiful girl. How are you?" Seeing him and my daughter together, I was deeply touched and tears welled up in my eyes. Tears welled up in my eyes. I had wished so much for him to be the father of my child, but I knew that could never be. With a parting wish, he said, "Best of luck to you, Diana, and your beautiful baby girl. Take care now." Then he walked over to the self-checkout area to complete his purchase. As I stood there watching him walk away for the last time, it gave me the closure I needed, even though it wasn't what I really wanted. I share this story in the hope that others, both women and men, will not repeat my terrible life-altering mistake. If my experience can help just one person, that would be a blessing. So thank you for listening, and I wish you the best of luck in your relationships. Diana, I'm a 1-year-old. I've been in a relationship with my year-old husband for almost years. We tied the knot within a year of meeting and we now have 2 children. He is truly an outstanding individual, good-looking, highly educated with a good-paying job, and he has never cheated on me. Before the recent events, my close friends and family often reminded me how lucky I was to have met him and what an incredible guy he is. I used to think of us as soul mates, but about a year ago, I made a significant mistake. I went out with a group of friends to celebrate a birthday party, and I got extremely drunk during the evening. There was a man who had been flirting with me all night and I ended up sleeping with him. It was the first time I had felt this good in many years and I can't explain why, but I ended up going home with him. Within minutes of realizing the mistake I had made, I quickly ordered a cab home and tearfully confessed everything to my husband. I was overwhelmed with regret and self-loathing. At first he remained silent and self-loathing. However, after my persistent pleading and begging, we finally decided to seek counseling. During our counseling sessions, he often seemed disconnected and spent his time scrolling through his phone when asked about his feelings or what he could do to improve the situation. Most of the time, he seemed apathetic and remained silent even when we asked questions or tried to engage him in the conversation. I understand the mistake I made, and for the past year, I have been doing everything I can to save our marriage. It has come to the point where I have even agreed to engage in sexual activities that I strongly dislike just to please him. I have taken on all the household responsibilities including cleaning, cooking, and every single chore without any help from him. There are times when he completely ignores me and moves around the house as if I don't exist, but he always treats our children with love and avoids speaking negatively about me to them and tries to shield them from our arguments, sometimes when I refuse to do certain things. Regardless of the time, he threatens divorce and abandonment or brings up my past infidelity and blames me for our problems. He insists that marrying me was a mistake and resorts to derogatory name-calling. I am also aware that he has been communicating with other women, and when I confront him about it, he immediately brings up my past infidelity. As a distraction, I have no concrete evidence that he is seeing someone behind my back, but I just wish things could go back to the way they used to be. On one occasion, when I confronted him about a message I saw from another woman on his phone, he forcefully took my hand and led me into the main hall, pointing to the door and telling me that the exit was right there. I feel like I have lost the caring and loving husband I once had, and he has turned into a completely different person. I love him deeply and can't imagine myself with anyone else. I regret my mistake every single day, and all I want is to have my family back together. I'm not sure if I can save this marriage together, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm not quite sure what I'm looking for right now. Maybe I just need to vent. I wish I could go back in time and undo all of this. I forgot to mention more details about our therapy sessions. I want to make it clear that I took full responsibility for my actions during those sessions and did not blame them on myself. It was only later, when the therapist suggested that my husband may have done things to push me away, which led to my infidelity and his current behavior, that things began to change during therapy. I am considering changing therapists to give our relationship another chance. I really want this to work. Update. Today I decided to have a conversation with my husband, as many people had pointed out that it seemed like he wasn't making an effort anymore and just wanted to move on. I first approached him with the intention of explaining the whole situation, expressing my understanding of his pain, and acknowledging that he may not want to work on our marriage anymore. I told him that if that was truly what he wanted, would accept it and allow him to move on with his life. I made sure to tell him that I still loved him deeply and always will. He remained silent, looking at me, then came over and hugged me and tears welled up in his eyes. I couldn't help but cry with him. It was the first time in a long time that I had felt a heartfelt, loving hug and seen genuine emotion from him. After what seemed like a few minutes of crying and holding each other, he finally let go and asked me to sit down with him. He began by expressing that he still loved me with all his heart and cared deeply for our children. However, he admitted that he was struggling to. He explained that he was experiencing intense moments of anger, not only because of his resentment for what I had done, but also because vivid images of my actions kept replaying in his mind, making it difficult for him to let go. He confided in me that he had met many women who had flirted with him over the years. He insisted that he could never have done to me what I had done to him because his love for me was too deep to cause such pain. Hearing him say this made me break down even more. He went on to explain that something inside him was broken and could not be repaired. He mentioned that he had had conversations with other women over the past few months, but had refrained from any physical involvement with them because he did not feel it was the right course of action. When I suggested that he could move on, it was. For the first time, he felt that I had truly grasped the depth of his feelings and how deeply shattered he was inside. He expressed uncertainty about our future together, but indicated that he wanted to be single and explore his own life for now. He mentioned that we might reconcile in the future, but for now he needed to focus on self-improvement separately from me. I wanted him to keep what he brought into the marriage, and I had no desire to take that away from him. Even though he made considerably more money than I did, I was adamant that he not be burdened with financial support, including child support. All of this brought him to tears, and he expressed his hope that someday he could find it within himself to forgive me. He believed that some time apart would be beneficial for both of us, allowing us to reflect on our lives. He mentioned that he intends to consult with a lawyer and expects to file divorce papers in about a week. I have no intention of pursuing new relationships after the divorce, nor do I desire to do so. So either my sincere hope is that he will return to me one day and we can rebuild our former family. I deeply wish he had not found out about this incident. The weight of remorse is heavy and I feel like I have lost the one person who is truly my soulmate. All right, that was a heartfelt story. Now let's move on to another story. Stay tuned and let's dive into the events I am about to recount. Took place 8 years ago in 2014 for privacy reasons. I am currently 39 years old and have been happily married to my wife Jill for 4 years. She is 29 years old. We have 2 sons, ages 1 and 3. In addition, I have 4 older children from my previous marriage to Amber, who is also 39 years old. These older children include 3 boys and 1 girl, ages 17 male, 15 female, 14 male and 10 male. Most of my story revolves around the 10-year-old, whom I will call Shane. Let's back up about 11 years ago, at which time my wife, Amber, and I already had 3 children and were expecting our 4th, Seth's life was busy but satisfying. We had a young family, and I had recently taken on more responsibilities at work, which allowed us to buy a house, an SUV, and a van, and it gave Amber the opportunity to be a stay-at-home mom. However, it also meant that I had to work long hours, including weekends. Despite my busy schedule, I always made sure to spend quality time with my family and did my fair share of childcare and housework throughout our marriage. During those times, I, along with our parents and her sister, stepped in to support her whenever she needed a break. It's important to note that the decision to have 4 children was a mutual one, with Amber playing a significant role in that decision. Amber gave birth to Seth, and everything seemed to be fine. Especially since Amber decided to get a puppy for our children, it was my 3 older children who had wanted a dog and had been pestering her about it. Our home was a lively place, bustling with children, a dog, and frequent visits from extended family. I enjoyed the lively atmosphere. He had blonde hair, striking blue eyes, and a fair complexion, quite unlike the rest of the family, who had dark hair, brown eyes, and darker skin due to our ATTEN heritage. I understood that appearances can vary within families, but this difference stuck in my mind. It was all in good fun, and we didn't take it seriously. As time went on, Seth's features became even more distinctive. To make a long story short, before he turned 2, I secretly arranged for a DNA test to determine his parentage. It was an incredibly painful day and I cried profusely for obvious reasons. Although I wasn't completely shocked, I contacted the clinic and inquired about the accuracy of these tests. The clinician mentioned that such errors were extremely rare, but suggested that we do another test to validate the initial results. We complied and the second set of results confirmed the same result. My life was rapidly unraveling and I was faced with the dilemma of what to do. Next, I understand that many people may criticize me for this, but my initial plan was to do nothing, to simply ignore the situation. I thought I could continue to live life as usual to see if I could come to terms with this revelation. I followed this approach for a period of 5 weeks, during which time I refrained from confronting my wife. I behaved normally, and even maintained a regular intimate relationship with her. However, my thoughts eventually overwhelmed me and I began to feel a sense of guilt. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney and provided her with all the details, including the results of the DNA tests. She inquired about my wife's reaction and I admitted that I had not confronted her because I was unsure about pursuing a divorce until that moment. I confronted her with witnesses to hear her side of the story, but I was determined to end the marriage and chose not to follow that advice. I understood that if I confronted her I might weaken and give her another chance instead of proceeding with the divorce. The attorney inquired if I knew who the affair partner AP was and I informed her that I did not. She suggested that I investigate phone records, emails, texts, etc. for possible clues. She clarified that I was not going to tell her who the affair partner AP was. She clarified that under our state laws, since I was married when Seth was born, I am his legal father, even though he is not my biological child. She further explained that the only remote possibility of my being relieved of my parental responsibilities by the court would be if 1, the biological father voluntarily comes forward, or 2, my wife files a paternity claim with the biological father with limited time to do so. To conduct this detective work, I decided to hire a private investigator recommended by my attorney. In just 1 day of reviewing our computer and cell phone records, the PI successfully identified the affair partner. The evidence collected by the PI revealed that the affair began on a dating site, one of the largest at the time. Amber created a profile under the alias Elsa25 where her bio falsely claimed she was single, had no children, and was seeking casual encounters. The profile remained active on the site. Although all of the pictures had been removed, Amber had been exchanging messages with several men on the site for nearly 3 months. It was truly disturbing. Most of their interactions consisted of casual conversation and mild flirting, except for the man she had the affair with, whom we'll refer to as Bob. He lived 23 miles away and worked the 311 p.m. All their interactions took place through the dating site. It is worth noting that Seth bears a striking resemblance to Bob. Amber informed Bob that she did not have a phone, claiming that she had lost hers and had not replaced it. While this was clearly a tactic to avoid being tracked, you can tell from her messages that she abruptly ended contact with him after their 3rd date. Although Bob continued to send her messages, she never responded and he eventually gave up. Unbeknownst to her, Amber had set up message notifications from the dating site to be sent to a Yahoo.com email account. She never checked the email account but remained logged in, so when the PI did a routine check of Yahoo. All the emails appeared on the screen. Hiring this investigator turned out to be a wise investment at 950 with the evidence he uncovered and the DNA test results. I had all the evidence I needed for an ATF fault divorce, and I authorized my attorney to proceed. I had a plan to serve Amber with divorce papers in the presence of both sets of parents. Some might consider this a less confrontational approach, but I had lost trust in my wife at this point and was concerned she might react irrationally or make false accusations. Irrationally or make false accusations. When we were alone, I had informed my parents of the situation in advance so that they would not be surprised and could be supportive. The meeting was highly charged and my nerves were on edge, but I held it together. I began by presenting the DNA test results and then provided copies of significant messages that had been exchanged between Amber and Bob. Both sets of parents were visibly upset, as was Amber. She looked at me with a dazed expression and wore a sad, apologetic look. After the tension in the room began to subside, Amber expressed her deep remorse and asked for forgiveness, explaining that she loved me and our family more than anything. I told her that I forgave her, but then handed her a separation agreement. I explained that I wanted a legal separation of 6 months and suggested that she stay with her parents for the next 6 months. I explained that after the initial 2 weeks with her parents, she could return to our house to complete the legal separation. However, I made it clear that one of my parents would be with us at all times because I no longer trusted her. Afterwards, I handed her the divorce agreement and informed her that she would need to hire a lawyer, at which point she became inconsolable. Her mother asked if there was any way to avoid the divorce. I countered by saying that she had cheated, had another man's baby, and lied to me for over 2 years. How much more significant can it get? Eventually they left and we proceeded with the separation, with my wife begging me several times a day not to go through with the divorce during the separation period. During the separation period, my attorney was able to contact Bob, who expressed deep remorse and claimed that he had no knowledge that Elsa Amber was married. He explained that he had no intention of breaking up a family and that he was struggling financially, making it impossible for him to support a child. It became clear that he would not voluntarily take on fatherly responsibilities. Regarding the reason for the affair, Amber's sister informed me that Amber claimed that she had created the dating profile merely to seek attention from men and had no intention of being married. She mentioned that she felt insecure about herself after gaining weight following the birth of our 3 children. She wanted to know if other men still found her attractive. It is worth noting that I never criticized her weight or appearance. I always reassured her that she was beautiful because, in my eyes, she truly was. Fast forward 8 months and our divorce was officially finalized. My attorney requested an equal division of assets, but omitted alimony from the settlement. Alimony from the settlement due to her infidelity and affair. Child support was only sought for my 3 biological children, although it was expected that the judge might require support for Seth since I was his legal father. The judge allowed me to keep the house as part of the agreement, but granted Amber 51% primary custody. After the judge read the ruling, the judge asked if Amber and I had any questions or comments. I then addressed the judge and expressed my gratitude for her thoughtful ruling and for giving me the opportunity to speak. I went on to point out what I perceived to be an injustice in our state's family court laws, emphasizing their apparent bias against men. I questioned the fairness of a situation where a woman who cheats has a child with another woman. Woman cheats, has a child with another man, deceives her husband about it, and yet not only is she awarded primary custody of his children, but he is required to financially support a child who is not biologically his. In response, the judge conveyed her understanding of my perspective, but clarified that she was following the law and prioritizing the well-being of the children. She explained that, in this case, it was in the best interest of the child for me to continue to be Seth's legal father. She praised me as a good man and a great father, which factored into her decision to grant me 49% custody and allow me to keep the family home. The judge emphasized that the only way the court could relieve me of my legal parental responsibility would be if the biological father voluntarily stepped forward and assumed that responsibility. She also noted that, even if such a scenario were to unravel, the court would still have to rule on my legal parental responsibility. I then informed the judge that I had already provided the court with the name and address of a biological father. I inquired whether this information would be sufficient to at least initiate a court order for a DNA test. The judge clarified that this was a civil matter and the courts don't usually intervene in this way. Wife or I would have to convince the biological father to come forward voluntarily, or my ex-wife could file a paternity suit. Wife could file a paternity suit against him. My ex-wife's attorney chimed in, expressing her client's reluctance to involve another man in her child's life, and asserting that Seth already had a wonderful father in me. I concluded my statement with the feeling that everyone in the courtroom was essentially telling me, "Tough luck, deal with it." I wanted to highlight this courtroom exchange to encourage any man contemplating marriage to thoroughly research the laws in their state. The hearing came to a close and I was officially divorced. I continued to fulfill my child support obligations and continued to be the best father I could be to all of my children, including Seth. Despite the circumstances, I treated him no differently because he was my son and I was the only father he had ever known. I loved him. A few years later I met and married Jill and we had our 2 boys. Now I have a total of 6 children and I couldn't be happier. I thank the Lord every day for blessing me with my children and for bringing Jill into my life. And for bringing Jill into my life at the right time. As for Amber, I forgave her a long time ago. These days, her primary focus is being a mother and taking care of her elderly parents. Since our divorce, she has gained a considerable amount of weight and was recently diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which requires her to take medication daily. Before I got serious about Jill, Amber made numerous attempts to win me back. Over the years, she has apologized countless times and admitted that the affair was the worst thing she ever did. We are now on good terms and co-parenting with her has been quite smooth. Amber plans to go to school to become an LPN, as she will need a stable source of income when child support runs out in a few years when each child turns 18. Over the years, Amber has dated a few older men, but nothing has turned into a serious relationship. I suppose it's difficult to date when you're a woman with 4 children. That's all I wanted to share with you. Once again, I'll leave you with this piece of advice. If you're a man considering marriage, take a moment to pause, gather your thoughts, and make sure you have a wonderful partner before you make a potentially life-changing decision. Story 2. I was born in 1985 in a small town. My parents were hard-working farmers who owned a small plot of land that they had inherited from their own parents. As the oldest son, I was expected to take over the family farm and continue the legacy my parents had built. I worked hard in school and was determined to succeed, but there was one thing that always held me back: my love for music. In 2001, when I was 16, I met a girl who shared my passion for music. We spent countless hours playing guitar and singing together and I knew she was the one for me, but my parents didn't approve because she wasn't from a farming family. Despite their disapproval, I continued to see her and we fell deeply in love. But in 2004 she suddenly disappeared without a trace. I was heartbroken and didn't know how to move forward with time. I began to focus on my work on the farm, investing in new technology and equipment to improve our yields, and our family became more prosperous. But there was one problem: my younger brother, who had become obsessed with pills and was causing problems for our family. Meanwhile, my parents continued to pressure me to marry a girl from a farming family and settle down. In 2012, I met a woman who shared my love for music and understood my passion. We got married and had a son, but my parents were still not happy because she was not from a farming family. Eventually he was arrested. I tried to talk to my parents about the situation but they refused to see reason. I realized that I was becoming like my parents, stuck in a cycle of family dysfunction. Last year I walked into our bedroom and found my wife crying. I rushed to comfort her. I asked her what was wrong. She hesitated for a moment and then whispered, "I'm pregnant." I was overjoyed at first. We had been trying to conceive for some time and the thought of having a child together was exciting, but as I looked at her I noticed that her expression had changed. I asked, "I don't know if this is a good thing," she said quietly, avoiding my eyes. Then without another word she got up and left the room. Had she changed her mind about wanting a child? Was there something else going on that she wasn't telling me about? Over the next few weeks, I noticed that she was spending an inordinate amount of time on her phone, and whenever I asked her about it, she would get defensive and say that it was work-related. I tried to bring up the pregnancy again but she seemed distant and uninterested. It was like she was going through the motions but her heart wasn't in it. Finally the day came when she gave birth to our daughter. I was there by her side holding her hand and encouraging her through each contraction. When our little girl finally arrived I couldn't help but cry tears of joy. Tears of joy. She was perfect in every way, with her mother's dark hair and bright blue eyes. As I held our daughter for the first time, my wife looked at me with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. We went to stay with our parents for 2 weeks and I noticed that my wife and brother became strangely close to each other, whispering to each other, sharing inside jokes, and spending hours alone together, as if I did not exist as the primary breadwinner. I was busy with both of our families most of the time, managing my father's businesses, working as an investment banker, and overseeing our various rental properties, but whenever I came home, I would find my wife and brother deep in conversation or laughing over some shared memory. It was strange to say the least. My wife had always been close to my sister, so I couldn't understand why she was suddenly gravitating towards my brother, and as for my sister, I could tell that something was bothering her. She would avoid my gaze or seem lost in thought whenever I asked her if everything was okay. Last week, my father asked me to join him on a fishing trip, just the 2 of us, to spend some quality time together. As we cast our lines and waited for the fish to bite, my father regaled me with stories of his own fishing trips with his father, telling me how proud he was of me and what a good son I was, but I could sense that there was something more on his mind. He was disappointed in my younger brother, who had no direction in life, did not work, abused pills and alcohol, and generally made bad choices. It was clear that my father was not very close to my brother, although my mother had always been his champion. As we packed to leave, my father handed me the fishing gear and a small note, telling me to wait until he was gone. It was a paternity test for my daughter and my brother. It confirmed 99% that I was not the biological father of my daughter. I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. I had always been close to my daughter and had never doubted that she was mine, but now everything was different. I couldn't even begin to imagine how my wife would react to the news, and as for my daughter, I didn't know what to think. Would she still see me as her father, or would our bond be broken forever? I rushed to my family's house. Everyone was there and I confronted my wife and brother. As I stood there trying to come to terms with what had just happened, my mind was racing with a million different thoughts. and emotions: anger, hurt, betrayal. It was all swirling around inside me like a storm. I could not believe that my wife and my own brother had done this to me. It was a deep personal betrayal that cut to the core of who I was as a man and a father, and yet at the same time I could not help but feel a strange sense of numbness, as if the shock of it all had left me numb. As the fight continued, my mother tried to intervene and calm things down, begging me to forgive my wife and brother, to move on and accept the situation for what it was, but I just couldn't do it. How could I forgive them for such a heinous act? In the midst of it all, my daughter stood there looking up at me with those innocent eyes. I couldn't bear the thought of losing her, but at the same time, I knew that everything had finally changed. After what felt like hours, the fighting stopped, my wife and brother left, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was for sure: my life would never be the same as it was on that fateful Saturday. Trying to come to terms with the impending divorce, my sister arrived from the Netherlands for a vacation. Little did she know that she was about to be drawn into the family drama that had just unfolded. As soon as she got wind of what had happened, she wasted no time in confronting my wife and mother and giving them a piece of her mind. Later that day, my sister called me and we had a heart-to-heart. As we talked, my sister revealed that our mother had been concerned about my health and how I would react to the news of the divorce. She also mentioned that our younger brother had forced our mother to keep the truth from me. My sister and I agreed that we did not want anything to do with the family and decided to leave. With my sister's offer of help, I began to consider moving to the Netherlands after my divorce was finalized. As I continued to go through these difficult times, my health took a serious hit that I lost count of how many times I threw up, and my blood pressure and sugar levels increased. Today, 2 days later, my father called me with some devastating news. My mother, the person who was supposed to be my confidant and support system, had suffered a stroke during her lunch break and was hospitalized in critical condition. My wife, father, and children were by her side. You see, my relationship with my mother had been strained for some time. She had always favored my other brother over me, even going so far as to threaten to cut me off from the family. But what hurt the most was that she had chosen to side with my wife during our problems, even though I had always been there for her. I had been struggling with depression for some time, and despite therapy sessions, nothing seemed to be working for me. The feeling of hopelessness was overwhelming and I felt like I was drowning. The last few days have been an absolute nightmare. My lawyer told me that I could potentially inherit a portion of my mother's estate if she did not leave a will, but that is the last thing on my mind right now. I have no interest in money or material possessions. All I want is to be with my son and escape this dysfunctional family. The good news is that since my son is a minor, I have the legal right to get a restraining order against my wife and brother. They are endangering my son's life with their reckless behavior. Alcohol and pills are frowned upon in my country, and I will not allow my son to be exposed to that toxic environment. Despite all of this, I find myself torn between my mother's condition and my desire to be with my son. It is hard to believe that just 3 weeks ago everything seemed relatively normal. Now it feels like my world is falling apart. The only thing keeping me going is my son. I know I have to be strong for him and protect him from the chaos that surrounds us. As I sat in my lawyer's office going over the details of my pending divorce and the legal actions I had taken against my own brother, I could not help but feel a sense of emptiness. Sure, my brother had committed heinous acts, including pill offenses and having an affair with my wife, but even the possibility of him spending 2 years in prison did not bring me any satisfaction. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the fact that it was my own flesh and blood that had done this to me. The one person I thought I could always count on had turned out to be a snake in the grass, and it felt like my world had been turned upside down. I knew that my actions would have consequences for my brother, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough, that he had destroyed my trust and my family. And I managed to locate my younger brother who had been hiding for 4 days. I found him and beat the crap out of him. Despite my actions, I did not cause him any significant harm as he is still my sibling. He was hospitalized due to the injuries I inflicted on him, but he knew better than to report me to the authorities. With my connections, I could have easily had him arrested if he had attempted to do so. He has since been taken into police custody. My sister and I have relinquished our claim to our property, leaving him to have it all to himself. He was an ungrateful individual who betrayed me and my father, lived in our shadows, ruined my family and caused our separation. My aspirations, efforts, and family have all been shattered, and I find no comfort in this. I remember the day it all changed. It was a stormy night and I huddled with my family hoping to ride out the storm, but it was too strong and it tore through our home, leaving destruction in its wake. After the storm passed, my family was shattered. My wife was devastated, but I knew deep down that our marriage was over. I knew deep down that our marriage was doomed. My mother suffered a stroke and my father was a shell of his former self. Our home that he had built with his own 2 hands was destroyed, but the hardest part was watching my son go through it all. He was so young, but he understood what was happening. He saw the divorce and the turmoil, but he was understanding and strong. I was proud of him and I knew that I had to be strong for him too. It was a hard decision, but I knew I had to divorce my wife. We signed the papers and she would get spousal and child support for 3 years, but I would be the legal guardian of our son until he turned 17 and then our daughter until she reached puberty. After that I would be her legal guardian until she turned 18. It was a lot to handle, but I did my best. My brother was in jail recovering from his obsession and affair with my wife. I couldn't bring myself to hate him, but I knew he needed help. I focused on being there for my children and eventually I started to rebuild my life. I took my son to the Netherlands where we explored the country and made new memories together. I even started dating again and met a woman who made me feel alive again. We got married in a small ceremony surrounded by our loved ones. It was a new beginning for me and I was grateful for the second chance at happiness. Forgiveness Day. I picked up the phone and dialed my brother's number. The call went to voicemail, so I left a message asking if we could meet and talk later. That day my brother called back and agreed to meet. When I saw my brother I could feel the resentment trying to bubble up inside of me, but I pushed it away. I told him that I forgave him for what had happened in the past and that I wanted to move on. To my surprise, my brother was grateful and relieved. He had been carrying the guilt of what he had done for years and was afraid that I would never forgive him. From that day forward, my brother and I began to rebuild our relationship in prison. He changed, we met regularly, and we even began to work on a project together. The forgiveness I offered my brother had not only freed him from his guilt, it had opened the door to a new relationship. I realized that forgiveness wasn't just about the other person, it was about freeing myself from the negative emotions that were holding me back. I felt lighter, happier, and more at peace than I had in years. It was a day I would never forget, the day I found the courage to forgive and move on.